Hi there, it's Marcus here, and we're about to start another adventure, the adventure that is History 300. And I'm going to, in this opening thought bubble, it really is a thought bubble, it's not going to be particularly long. I want to just spell out a few of the key elements of the course, I guess. If you haven't had me before, you'll be surprised, I guess, because I don't teach content in the way that the other history teachers do in this university. I'm more about the thinking. How do we think historically? What are the key elements of historical thinking? What's the relationship of the past to the present and the future, and so on? Let me begin by introducing you to this lovely golden face here, this chap that was discovered in, I think, the 1870s or 80s by a German proto meaning emerging, archaeologist called Heinrich Schliemann, who actually in his early life had been a businessman. He made a lot of money, and so he could spend the second half of his life digging up places. And he went and dug up Troy, which he found in Turkey, using the Iliad as his guidebook, which is really, really impressive. And then he went off to find out Mycenae, which was the hometown or the home place of one of the lead figures from the Iliad, a guy called Agamemnon, who was king. And there's a whole bunch of stuff around Agamemnon, the Iliad, the plays of Aeschylus and Euripides and people like that, the Greek guys who wrote about them years later, dramatizing them beautifully. Agamemnon was murdered by his wife, who was really cheesed off at him for having sacrificed their daughter to Artemis, so it goes on and on. And the whole point of this is, apart from the fact that stories are interesting and the past is just rich beyond compare with stuff for us to think about, is that Schliemann dug up this mask, a death mask, and he said it was the death mask of Agamemnon. Turns out, not surprisingly, given how long ago this was, that his romance with Agamemnon got in the way of his his thinking about, well, how far down was it? Turns out it was actually about 300 or 400 years before the events of Troy, which happened, roughly around 1125 BCE, before the Common Era. And this apparently, from memory, is about 1500 BCE. But it is Mycenaean, and it's a beautiful example of, the wealth and power of elite cultures at that time. But it's a great way to start thinking about the past, because the past, we have books about the past. We have the Iliad and the Odyssey, for instance, and the plays of Aeschylus and Euripides and so on. But the past is all over the place, and a lot of it is in material cultural artifacts like this. Material culture. I'm drinking from a lovely cup. I'm drinking coffee. If this was actually put in a grave next to my bones with the coffee in it, the coffee would leave sediments. Archaeologists and so on are able now to actually pick up the sediments and actually work out what it was that was in the vessel and so on. So they can do this. So they're working out all sorts of stuff about the ancient past through the material remains of that past. And that's adding to the vocabulary and to the tool that historians can bring to bear to understand the past. Okay, so that's kind of like an introduction to the way my brain works. It kind of draws in elements from all over the place. And I'm going to encourage you to start thinking that way, to see relationships, to see how this and that and this and that all connect. Because we don't live in a world where history is over there, the present is here, and the future is over there. We don't live in a world where China is over there, and India is there, and Europe is over there, and the Americas are over there, and Australasia is where we are. We're intimately woven into the fabric of human relations, but beyond that, we're also intimately woven into the ecological and the environmental and so on. Climate change is reminding of that, everyday type thing. Now, let me continue then. So What are we going to do? Well, this course is called Questioning History, and it's called Questioning History because it's built around a series of questions. Now, we don't do a question per week type thing. The first 10 weeks have questions, and then the rest of the time we spent talking about the final assessment and so on. So from week 10, we've sort of finished our questioning, but you're invited in your assessment to actually take one of those questions and apply it to some case study that you're interested in, that really maybe you've been burning all these years of your history undergraduate time to go and study the ancient Greeks. You can do so now, and you can test, well, can history be objective? What is the role of theory in the history? What is the role of narrative, and so on? So these questions are spelled out in your course outline, and we will, of course, be working through them. And the course readings, are aligned in some way or other to these questions as well. So first assessment, which is going to come up remarkably quickly, of course, is for you guys to actually practice writing a blog. Oh my God, say some of you. Oh, great, say others of you. We get different reactions every year. But really, history is, in one of its key elements, I think, is about communication. Just look at the history channels and the number of history programs that are on the various TV channels, the various YouTube channels, and so on. There's a lot of history geeks on X, which used to be Twitter, and so on. You'll find history and the past everywhere and being examined, both in good ways and poor ways. This task is looking at objectivity. Can history be objective? Okay, but I'm not asking this in some vague way. You've got a week 1 reading from a book called Fake History. Okay, Fake History, lurking around here somewhere. Otto English. Now I've got him in my hand here. The first chapter looks at the myths, the historical so-called stories around Winston Churchill, and he says most of them are wrong. Okay, most of them are fake history, and they've been cooked up by people who are seeking to gain political advantage in the present. Boris Johnson is one of the examples he gives there. The way Boris wrote a lovely so-called history about Winston Churchill, most of which is totally fabricated. It's not true. So this idea of can history be objective aligned with fake history. So I'm going to ask you to take the Winston Churchill chapter from that book, the first week's reading, and explore this question of can history be objective. We will talk more about that, of course, in our face-to-face meetings, in our workshops. And, I'm going to say, follow your nose. How do you understand this? You might want to focus right on Winston Churchill. You might want to take fake history and say, look, Winston Churchill, there's fake history here. But what about the way Australia talks about its Indigenous relations past? Or what about this? So we can come up with different takes on this idea of fake history, and how it is that we have developed over the last 150 years tools for understanding our past and keeping us, I guess, honest as historians. All right. So that's what we're going to look at. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited to see what you come up with in terms of this idea of objectivity aligned with fake history. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about things that matter. Okay. So you've got this very short reading from Brené Brown. Okay, Brené Brown, an interesting American researcher. She heads up a big research group, and she's professor in, I'm just trying to think whether, I think it's counseling, but yeah, I'm showing that I don't pay much attention to these things, because to me labels are only useful if they help me define something in a specific way, and then I say, well, let's throw the label out now. But curiosity it's something that's really important to me. It's important in my own life, surrounded by books and all the clutter of my life and the way my brain works. But it's also something that I have really found is an asset to you guys as you go off into your world, whether you're going to be teachers or researchers or whatever. And Brené Brown, in that little reading, it's about 4 pages long, says, look, curiosity is recognizing a gap in our knowledge about something that interests us. She draws a distinction between curiosity and interest, by the way, and becoming emotionally. So there's an emotional quotient here, and cognitively, that's intellectually invested in closing that gap through exploration and learning. Curiosity often starts with interest. That's interesting. I might go and find out more about Winston Churchill. And can range from mild curiosity, yeah, it's kind of interesting, to passionate. I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to writing the history of Winston Churchill, that sort of thing. Now, I'm curious about a lot of stuff, and you'll come across some of those elements in the course as we go on. One of the things that I've always had a love of, going right back to my undergraduate when I studied early English literature, one of those things that I studied was Beowulf. Now, this is a extract, a little image here of the opening lines from Beowulf's saga. You've probably possibly seen the movie. You may never have heard of Beowulf too. But Beowulf was a Middle English, that means Anglo-Saxon, poem written about a guy who goes and beats the crap out of monsters and so on, and eventually dies a noble, heroic death fighting a dragon. All right. So one of the things that you might be surprised to hear, or maybe not, is that English has not always been the same. If you at high school studied Shakespeare, you'll know that Shakespearean English, the English of the second half of the 16th century and first half of the 17th century, was quite different from our own, but it's intelligible. But if you go back another 500 to 600, 700 years, Beowulf is almost totally unintelligible. So if I'm making you curious, you'll notice as I put my little cursor onto this guy here that it pops up with a URL to a website hosted by Open Culture, a very interesting, good, reputable website, in which they give us examples of what Old English sounded like. Go and have a listen. You might understand 1 in 50 words or something like that, but there is a music to it, and that music inspired J.R.R. Tolkien, particularly, and I think it's in the second lecture I do. I talk about the impact of Old English poetry on Tolkien's own thinking and the way he emerged as a writer of fantasy, not just as a scholar of early English and other languages as well, for that matter. Okay, so hopefully you're getting curious. Now, something else. This course is about reading and thinking with the readings that you do. There's quite a lot of reading to do up until week 10, where again, I stopped the readings because you guys are so buried by then in your own research that it seems cruel of me to force you to read more. But there's so much, and we've got the extended reading section as well in the in Canvas. So that sort of accompanies, because this course I've run well over 10 years now. I can't remember when I started, probably 2011, 12, something like that maybe. And a lot of the readings, I recycle them, I move them up and down so I can have different conversations. It keeps my thinking alive, but my thinking matures and grows over time, just like all good thinking should do. So it's some of the lectures that you will have in this course, I recorded last year, for instance. I'm not going to recycle everything all the time, but I will re-record a number of the lectures to give you my sense of where I'm at intellectually, scholarly, academically, and pedagogically, as a teacher in the year of 2024. So one of my old heroes was a guy called Marc Bloch. Now, Marc Bloch was one of the people, a French scholar, who founded the Annales School with a few of his mates back in the late 20s, early 30s. Remarkable historian for his time. And, he was he was a Marxist historian. He was passionate about the history of people as they were. general people, not, you know, the history of the big toffee ones like Henry VIII or Cleopatra or Julius Caesar or someone. He was much more interested in what was it like to live 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, whatever. So he wrote this lovely double volume book on the Middle Ages and so on, which I have lurking around here somewhere. And he also wrote a book on the historical method, The Historian's Craft, okay, which was published posthumously in 1953. I say posthumously because he died, but he didn't die of, you know, a cold or cancer or anything. The Nazis took him out and shot him, believe it or not, because they didn't like him. And they didn't like history either, unless it was fake history. The Nazis were really big on fake history. No, so Mark Bloch is a guy that I recommend you go and look up, even if you just do a Wikipedia search. Did I say that? Wikipedia? Yes, go and do a Wikipedia search and have a read about this man. He was a remarkable man. He was part of the French Resistance, which is really what got him shot. It wasn't just that they didn't like his history, but he was one of those people who believes as an academic, you don't just sit in your office and read books and then write learned things. You actually go out and you live your passion. So I want to walk you through this. This is a section from that book, The Historian's Craft. And he says, look, the past is by definition a datum, which nothing in the future can change. You can't change the fact that Mark Bloch was shot by the Nazis in 1945. You can't change the fact that Winston Churchill, you know, led Britain through the majority of the Second World War and then got voted out, for instance. These things are set in stone. If we look at Brexit, we can't suddenly say, oh, Brexit's just made up. You can't do that. The past is a datum. In other words, there is a concreteness to the past that we can't alter. But this is where the question of objectivity comes in. How we think about the past, what we do with the past is what counts. He says, but the knowledge of the past is something progressive. It's cumulative. It keeps changing, okay, which is constantly transforming, and he uses the word perfecting itself. We will never have a true historical knowledge of anything, but we will have nice, solid approximations to an understanding of the truth of, let's say, the emergence of the Roman Empire out of the Republic and through those tumultuous years. So he goes on, anyone who doubts this need only recall how much it has improved under our very eyes in little more than a century. So he's talking the 1830s, 40s through to the 1930s, 40s, okay? So it's improved. He says vast areas of mankind, we would now say humanity, have emerged from the shadows. Egypt and Chaldea have shaken off their shroud. The lost cities of Central Asia have disclosed their now unspoken languages and long extinct religions. A civilization, all unsuspected, has but lately risen from its grave and upon the banks of the Indus. That's the Indus Valley civilization, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. Well worth having a look at, and we still can't read their language or their script, should I say. Okay, where was I? There it is. That is not all. And the ingenuity of scholars in further ransacking the libraries or in opening new excavations on ancient sites is neither the sole nor perhaps the most effective means of enriching our past picture of the past. Hitherto unknown techniques, and this is where I was talking about my coffee, right? And this lovely liquid in here, which if that cup, even if I drank it all, and it was put in a grave with me, with my old bones, a scientist, an archaeologist, would come along and take elements of the sediment, send them off to a chemist, or an archaeobiologist and people like that, because they have all these lovely subsets, and they would be able to say, that's a coffee. It was probably from a bean from here, there, or wherever. And they might give some other information as well. So these techniques, hitherto unknown techniques of investigation, have also come to light. We are more skillful than our predecessors in examining language for evidence of customs and so on, okay? Above all, we have learned how to probe more deeply in the analysis of social developments, which is what he was really focused on. The social developments, not the political, military, and so on, economic, but the social. The study of popular sites, okay? rights, sorry, popular rights, not sites, and beliefs are barely sketching its first outline. One of the things I talk about at the end of this little lecture is Stonehenge, where Francis Pryor, a wonderful British archaeologist, has written about the way Stonehenge was situated within a sacred landscape much larger than the Stonehenge area. It's the immediate area of the site itself. So I will touch on that in a moment. So these sorts of things, the rites, the rituals, and so on, long hidden, may stay elusive from us. The Eleusinian Mysteries is one that comes to mind because it rhymes with elusive. But yeah, so there is stuff that we will never be able to know. There's always that stuff outside our reach. But, you know, when we examine grave goods, burials, we examine written texts written by ancient peoples, or, and this is wonderful stuff, you know, they're now using AI computer algorithms to unpack and read the burnt remains of scrolls from Pompeii and Heracleum. So these scrolls, some of them will contain, they come from the library of, was it Pliny the Elder, I think, someone like that. No, it comes from the library of Julius Caesar's uncle, that's right. They're working out how to unravel these scrolls without destroying them. They've been carbonized through the immense heat, of course, of that volcanic eruption. And they're finding new texts. They just recently found some stuff on Plato and his the last days of Plato and that sort of thing. It's very, very exciting. So we are constantly deepening our understanding of the past through access points like texts that are suddenly being found and revealed to us. Okay, so this is fantastic. The last point is about economic history, which long ago was not considered important at all, but has now become so. Now let me move to the very last sentences of what he was saying here. All this is certain, that history is improving, that we're getting better at it. All it offers us the most extensive hopes that they are not unlimited hopes. Why? Because there's always that stuff outside our reach, right? This sense of virtually unlimited progress, granted as a science like chemistry, which is capable of creating even its own subject matter, is refused to us. Explorers of the past are never quite free. I love that. The past is their or our tyrant. We cannot invent, and this is where fake history comes in, we cannot invent stuff about the past. We have to reveal it. We have to find it, explore it through our own efforts. Okay? That, to me, is incredibly important insight. So, Rebecca Solnit, wonderful thinker, got her book here too, waving it around, Hope in the Dark. She talks about the strange workings of history. She says, look, and she wrote this book 2003 or something, I think, 2002. It was around the time that it was written in the shadow of 9/11 and George Bush and everything, where everything seemed grim and hopeless, especially to people on the sort of the blue people in America who are socially progressive. And she was reminding us all that that history doesn't just contain bad stories of Genghis Khan and the Black Death and all those sorts of stuff, but that there's a lot of hope to be gained also from studying history. And she says, look, we inhabit in ordinary daylight a future that was unimaginably dark a few decades ago. This was during the Cold War, when people found the end of the world easier to envision than the impending changes in everyday roles, the changes in gender roles, thought practices, practices that not even the wildest science fiction could anticipate, okay? Perhaps we should not have adjusted to it quite so easily, because we now take, you know, the fact, well, the world didn't end with an atomic blast. We didn't destroy ourselves in an instant of, you know, wild fervor and fury. But maybe we should not have adjusted to that fact quite so quickly. So it would be better if we were astonished every day to see the world we're living in, the world in which, gay marriage is not just countenanced or tolerated, but affirmed, in which Indigenous voice is being affirmed, despite the fact that we voted no last year in the election, not the election, in the referendum, despite the fact that Putin is trying to, take over the Ukraine, despite the fact that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, despite the fact that we have increasingly right-wing political parties moving around the place, right-wing as in unpleasant parties that are exclusionary of difference, trying to resist, I guess, this tide of consciousness that Rebecca Solnit is talking about here, despite the fact that it's a very high probability that good old Donald Trump will get back in as president again. It's the contradictions are everywhere. But when you take an historical lens to it, you learn to, I guess, live with those contradictions, but not just live with them. You can see cracks always through which, as Leonard Cohen would say, the light gets in. So here we go, Stonehenge. Your research, okay? So you've got to be curious about what you're going to research. You're going to spend 10 to 13 weeks working on that project. So it's got to be able to hold you. It's got to be something that excites you. It'd be really nice for you to finish up your history studies at USC, doing things that excite you, empower you, gives you a sense of what you might get yourself involved with in future years. As a teacher, you've got to take if you're doing teaching, you've got to take your passion into the classroom, So what can I say here? I'll come to Stonehenge in a moment. You spent much of your studies in history at USC looking at specific and mandated topics, stuff that, you've been told you have to study this, nationalism, and so on. You're doing History 140 with me, so we've got to look at David Christian and whatever. The topic you choose must be the basis for thinking through one of the weekly questions, those 10 questions I gave you in the earlier slide. These questions are listed in slide 2. I recently bought this book by Francis Pryor. It is excellent, and I could use it to explore question 4 about the role of narrative in history. So Francis Pryor looks at the archaeological evidence, the projects that have been unfolding around Stonehenge over the last decade or so, and he leads us into what I would call a narrative understanding of the processes going on around Stonehenge 3,000 to 4,000, 5,000 years ago. Okay, so to me, if I was in your position, I might be rushing off with that book under my arm, tracking down other stuff on Stonehenge and looking at the role of narrative in helping us understand sacred landscapes. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up here with a good old Freeman, whom I think he's a wonderful physicist. And he said, I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. In other words, don't get caught up in looking for answers. We are looking in history, not really for answers, but for understanding, deepening our understanding so that we can become more compassionate, more caring, more thoughtful human beings, okay? Anyway, so that's me. I'll wrap it up there for today, and we will pick up the threads when we meet in person, and I'm really looking forward to that because it's an absolute blast teaching this course, So thank you so much.